I think children are definitely going through a particularly tough time right now, or at least maybe in this century. We had a guest on yesterday saying like we're having an unprecedented amount of division. And considering when you look back at the 20th century, you'd think that's nuts. Um, and I think what we're witnessing right now is a period where, you have the cost of living crisis and a war in Ukraine and um, just a lot of tragedy and unrest beyond that. And it's things that are kind of happening that children may see in the periphery, but also might impact them. Um, just, things like the cost of living crisis and stuff like that. How would you go about explaining a world event like that?
Yeah, well, there's been several things, like you correctly point out, and we've had COVID, and before that there was a lot of media coverage of Trump and his wall separating Mexico from the rest of the United States, and children pick up on that. And because of the nature of social media now, which is a force for good and a force for bad, unfortunately, they're exposed to far more than we ever have been before. I mean, my children are in their late 20s, and MSN was just coming in then, and it was in its infancy. So their childhood wasn't really influenced at all by the saturation of social media. So children being born to get today, are in a very different world, and they're very much aware of what's going on. I mean, even having a radio in the car when I was a child, that was quite a novelty. So, the news coming across on the radio and so on, it's just 24/7. So it's very, very difficult. So I would be very careful what children are exposed to. I think some things you can't avoid, like the cost of living crisis, affects everybody. Now, it's a really broad topic, and in some cases, you've got children that are in danger of having the roofs taken from over their head, to others that are worried about, whose parents are worried about the heating bills, to others that won't be quite so directly affected by it, but nevertheless, it's still there and it's still being talked about. So my experience on having worked with agencies and bodies that deal with this kind of thing is that it's better to involve the children in it to a degree, and to be frank and honest and considerate. But importantly, and this is where books can really help, and the sharing of books, is to listen to the questions that children ask. Now, children often don't have the vocabulary to articulate how they feel, and that can come out in very difficult ways. Sometimes they can be disruptive. It's recognizing the subtext often about their behavior and what is the hidden meaning behind why they're behaving like they do. So dealing and speaking to them in an age appropriate way, listening and trying to understand what questions they're trying to articulate. And then also helping them and empowering them by including them in some of the solution-focused activities, things that they can get involved in helping to save money. Depending on their age, obviously, and depending on the scope of the problem, they can be involved in some of the decision making, and affording them that level of control and commitment can actually be quite empowering, and can also give them good skills for the future in terms of how to manage their own money. I mean, if any good can come anything out of anything like this, and it's hard, it is that lessons can be learned and not forgotten. To learn something in a practical way out of necessity means that they'll never forget that. And it just might make them more cost conscious in the future and less inclined to waste. So whilst ever we're all mindful of resources and how limited they are and how our environment can be so easily damaged, I suppose if anything can be gleaned from this, it's an opportunity to hook children into that way of thinking.
I think when I think about children, the cost of living crisis, one thing I think about a lot is peer pressure, talking about how when kids receive free school meals, they might be put in a separate line, or, I think I remember being in school, and if you couldn't afford to get the types of fashion that people were wearing, it was embarrassing. Is there a good way to try and like explain that to a child in a way that isn't, I don't know, a bit demeaning maybe?
That is a very tricky one, and it's one that crops up time and time again. I think that I would always be very careful about judging anybody else and what they're doing. So even if you were to disapprove of the way they were living their life or the decisions they were making, it's not great for children to follow that line of thinking. They need to be empowered by ideas, not persuaded by opinion. So whatever they've got ideas about, I think sometimes I understand that children like to identify with other children by running in the same lane as them. But one thing I've always said is make sure you run it, and to adults as well, run in your own lane and be confident about who you are and know who you are before you step out of the house. And if you have my children would say it's owning it. So if you're confident in who you are, you're less inclined to want to be part of a body of people who are all the same because they're wearing the same things and doing the same things and all the rest of it. That doesn't really make it easy, I understand that, but there is so much in the world to be grateful for, to enjoy. And wearing the latest trainers, which will be out of fashion next year, is not probably one of them. So I think it's helping them understand that that side of things can be a bit fickle, and there's so many things that can be enjoyed, like sport and music, which might not necessarily cost very much, if at all, because it depends how it's practiced. But I think extending their mindset to appreciate such greater things than comparing themselves with other people is no bad thing either. But I do appreciate that is difficult, and it's very hard to offer anything that's really going to help with that, other than to say give your child the confidence to be who they are and to enjoy their own life in their own way, and just be mindful of the fact that in that journey you're kind to others and supportive of others, and then that will play back. Thing that's come up recently, which I've never really focused on before, and I don't know quite why that was, and it's something that my publishers are really interested in. So I was brought up during the Biafran War in Nigeria, and during that time it was largely it's a complicated war. Biafra was a state that was trying to be independent of Nigeria, and is where the Christians were trying to establish their own, in a nutshell, that is, port, if you like. And I saw faith, the very worst of faith and the very best of faith, played out in all faith groups. Being amongst that at that time, and for example, we hid our nanny in our house to protect her, and she was protected also by friends from other religions as well. So I've seen religion as a powerful force for good. Now, people's own interpretation of God can vary. And so God's love in a nutshell can be considered religious by those that are coming from a religious perspective, or people have their own determination of what they feel God is. So fundamentally, it's about having faith, whether that's a faith in a greater God or in a greater good, or both, or whether it's just how you want to embolden yourself by feeling more positive in life. That is the message that's within that book. So even though it's very simple, the message is that God is with us always, and your interpretation of God may vary. And there are different faiths that see God in different ways. There are people of no faith that would say that they believe in something. And so the book provides that opportunity really for discussion.